You know that perfect holiday night, a Thanksgiving family get-together. You toast, you eat too much, you promise to text when you get home, and you talk about the tree that you'll put up next week and the drive to your Florida condo that you're planning to visit the next morning. And then you hit the road. It's a 90-mile drive back home. The streets are already sleepy. Wreaths in the windows, the kind of neighborhood that just feels warm and cozy. You pull into your long driveway. You grab your overnight bag and you turn off the alarm. You set out the things you'll need at dawn. Keys on the counter, a list for your contractors, who will be there while you're away to finish up a project. Upstairs, the house sounds like it always does. Old wood settling, the hum of the heater, the kind of sounds that you've fallen asleep to for years. And yet, if you pause, something feels slightly off. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's the holiday fatigue. You tell yourself you're overthinking. You click off the lamp. And morning never comes the way that it should because someone else came into your house that night. They were waiting, silently hoping that you would doze off soon and never wake up. They'd make sure of it. On Thanksgiving weekend, in one of the safest corners of Montgomery, Alabama, two people came home from a beautiful family dinner and never made it to morning. Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 63 of the Darklivity podcast. I'm your host, Kimbyrleigha, and I'm here with the one and only, my husband, Jonathan.
Hi. Darklivity is the dark downward slope into the degradation of the human mind and the consequences that such darkness brings to light.
To say that I can't believe that we're coming up on Christmas is really an understatement because honestly, it feels like it was just the summer and now we're going into winter. And I'm so glad that you have been with us so long. We're almost at 100,000 subscribers on this channel. We're so close, which is just amazing. And I do want to remind you of something before we get started. We are going to CrimeCon UK in October. It's going to be here faster than you think. And I know that a lot of you watch from the UK and you can't wait to meet us. And we feel the same way. So this is your chance. I'm going to leave all of that information below. So don't forget to make sure to let CrimeCon know when you get your tickets that we sent you by using our code Darklivity. And we cannot wait to see you there. And speaking of traveling all the way to the UK, sometimes I feel like I need to get away, but I don't really even want to leave my chair. I just want to give my brain a release from the heavy topics, and that is where our sponsor, June's Journey, comes in. It is a hidden object mystery game where you get to act like a detective, and it's perfect. It combines a thrilling murder mystery story, and you have to use your attention to detail, plus your memory skills to uncover hidden clues.
It's free to download on Android and iOS mobile devices and on your PC, and the better and quicker you are at identifying, remembering, and piecing things together, the more the mystery will unfold.
Yeah, and the thrilling story is set in the 1920s, which I love, and you get to play a character named June Parker, and she's on a mission to uncover all the clues surrounding the murder of her sister, Claire, and Claire's husband. And that's where your memory skills come in, so that you can uncover objects that help provide clues and evidence that relate to the murder mystery.
The further you get in the game, the more secrets will be revealed about June's family.
Plus, as you discover more things, you keep getting further into what happened to June's sister and why. There's murder, there's a mystery, there's drama, and there's also special events with new clues and plot twists. So there's always something new and exciting to uncover. I just got this cute letter congratulating me on 4 years of playing June's Journey.
There's also special event and seasonal content with in-game rewards. You can play by yourself, but you can also join a club and take part in special competitions. It's a great way to disconnect from your everyday stressors and take a break to another world.
For me, playing June's Journey is a good way to take a break from writing and editing, but it's challenging enough that my mind feels like I'm doing something worthwhile. My favorite time to play is during the holidays like Halloween and Christmas because of all the cool decorations you can add, and I'm adding a lot to my mansion. I just got a Santa sign and I put it right up next to my beagles in the front of my estate.
So we're really excited for you to download June's Journey for free by clicking the link below in the description or scanning the QR code on the screen.
And I would absolutely love to see all of your mansions. So after you download June's Journey and build yours up, add me as a friend. I'll leave all my profile info below. And thanks again to June's Journey for making today's video possible. This is a side note for anyone that's looking for a deep dive. I know that's why you're here anyway, but this one is especially good if you're decorating for the holiday, you're working, whatever the case may be, because this one is deep, but you also need to pay attention. There are a lot of twists and turns, lots of things going on in the story, and we try to be as detailed as possible. There's a lot of information that's going to be going on here, but here goes. Thanksgiving is supposed to send you home feeling full and happy, planning leftovers and road trips, not police tape. Today, we're going to meet a family from Alabama, the Springfords. Now, I usually say something like, they're so relatable, they're ordinary, but that's not exactly true in this case. Now, they're kind and generous and loving, and they're well-liked within their community, but they're extremely wealthy. They lived in a mansion in the Garden District, which is known to be a very elite, exclusive area of Montgomery, Alabama. So we're going to rewind through their story, walk the last normal hours of that night, and only then follow the investigation piece by careful piece, because this one will leave you with your jaw on the floor. Let's start by introducing you to Charlotte Springford. She was born Charlotte Turner, and if you grew up around Laverne, Alabama, you didn't need directions to the Turner's house. You just knew where it was. Small towns are like that. They attach people to landmarks and stories. And Charlotte Turner's family, their name was one of those stories. The well-known Pepsi bottling plant that her father, George Turner, owned and operated. It was the Pepsi Cola Distribution Center. So as you can imagine, their name was everywhere. Sponsorships at ball games, banners at new businesses that are opening in the area. You name it, you knew the Turners. But they were also the type of people that were down to earth, the kind of neighbor who lends you a tool, but then also remembers to ask you, hey, how did that work out for you? Charlotte Cope Turner came into the world on August 18th of 1942 to her parents George and Lucy Cope Turner. And as you can imagine, having a business at her parents' scale meant more than just financial security. The Turners were central figures in their community, but that also put them in a position to allow Charlotte many opportunities. She was the sort of girl that adults would say, watch her, but not in a way where she's going to be in trouble, but because she was going places. 4-H summers, swimming, dance, a quick wit that found its home in debate, and she was good at it.
But after her parents divorced, Charlotte's family life shifted a bit. Her mother moved out and her father, George, eventually remarried, bringing a woman named Dolores, who they all called Dee, into the house as Charlotte's new stepmother. Even with all those changes, Charlotte's childhood in Laverne still carried the same qualities that would define her later on. Her energy, her intelligence, all that natural ability to shine at whatever she set her mind to. And everyone knew her as the one who excelled at everything she tried. She gave her all, whether it was camp activities, a school project, or just the usual day-to-day moments. To the people around her, she always seemed destined for success. Eventually, after high school, Charlotte went on to the University of Alabama, where she earned her English degree and then a master's in speech communication.
People didn't just admire Charlotte, they wanted to be around her, which made her perfect for the role as a teacher. And after college, that's what Charlotte did. She moved to Panama City, Florida, and was teaching there. And that's where she ends up meeting her future husband, Winston Brent Springford. He was born on December 26 of 1941, just weeks after the attack on Pearl Harbor. He grew up in Alabama like she did, part of the generation shaped by the war years and the booming post-war economy that followed. Like Charlotte, he was bright, ambitious, and well-educated, and the two of them seemed to share a natural drive to excel. It was 1963 when Winston, who went by his middle name Brent, was in flight training at Tyndall Air Force Base, and they just clicked. Soon, they were dating and eventually were married in 1969. After the Air Force, Brent got a job at Corning Glass Works in New York. He and Charlotte made a home wherever the two of them landed. Their first child was a daughter. She arrived December 8th of 1971. They named her after her mama, Charlotte Stephanie Springford, but they called her by her middle name, Stephanie. In May of 1972, 6-month-old Stephanie was being looked after by Charlotte's father, George, and her stepmother, Dee. and her 22-year-old half-sister Lois, who had just graduated from college back in Laverne. Stephanie would be there for a week or so when Charlotte and Brent could take a little couples vacation, and it would be the first getaway as new parents, a break to enjoy each other, since things can get a little hectic with an infant.
But what happened next was one of those tragedies you never imagined could strike your own family. In the early hours of May 29th, 1972, a fire broke out in the den of Charlotte's father's home. Her dad, her stepmother, and the baby were all asleep together in the main bedroom. The smoke filled the house so fast that they never had a chance to get out, and then they died from smoke inhalation before anyone even knew what was happening.
All three of them passed away, and that is unbelievable. And while this fire was raging, 22-year-old Lois was still awake. She was in her room, she was up in her bed, and she was just reading when she realized what was happening. She broke one of her windows, and she managed to squeeze her way through, except a sharp edge cut her leg and hit an artery. She was bleeding out as she tried to run away from the house to safety.
But somehow, someone driving by saw the fire and happened to be there at that exact moment when Lois was trying to escape. She cried out for help, and then they pulled over and pressed on her leg until paramedics arrived. She survived, but they couldn't save her leg. It had to be amputated.
She was so lucky to get out alive, but at the same time, she just lost her parents and her niece. Charlotte had just lost her father, her stepmother, and her little girl. And of course, Brent lost his only child. It was so heartbreaking. They had to fly back from Mexico to attend funerals instead of their intention to have this stress-free vacation. It's unimaginable. Losing a child, especially in such a traumatic way, caused Charlotte to go into a major depression. It was so severe, she had to get medical treatment and was admitted to a psychiatric hospital for care. But after about a year, she was coming back to her baseline. Meanwhile, she'd actually inherited the family's Pepsi Cola bottling business. We're talking about a multi-million-dollar enterprise, and she could not take on that role on her own. So her husband, Brent, stepped up and became the president of this company. And together, the two of them rebuilt their life piece by piece.
So they moved to Alabama permanently, and they stayed close to the business, and Charlotte began teaching at her alma mater, the University of Alabama, in the College of Communication and Information Sciences. She served on the board of visitors, mentoring and guiding the next generation of students, and this is where you sort of get to understand the Springfords. Grief had made them gentler. They cared deeply about others, and after losing their child, they wanted to pour that love and care into the people around them. So they hosted parties, they funded projects, and they showed up for their community. Charlotte poured her energy into her students, into writing, into landscape design, and into charity work. And by this point, they were making about $250,000 a month. So it was quite a shift for them. But even with all of that, some things still felt missing.
They wanted another child. A few years had gone by, and they were finally ready to try again.
And they were excited when Charlotte got pregnant, but it turned out to be an ectopic pregnancy. So it wasn't viable, since the fetus was developing inside her fallopian tube, and it became another devastating moment for them.
Like they say, you can have all the money in the world, but it can't buy certain things. It can't stop tragedy from happening. And I think that's the theme of this entire story, sadly.
But finally, in March of 1976, Charlotte gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him after his father, Winston Brent Springford Jr., but they called him Brent Jr.
It's always funny to me that they have this name Winston, but then neither one of them even use the first name and they both go by their middle name, because I like Winston so much better. But then I thought, what would be your nickname?
Winnie.
Winnie? Stom. Like, what would it be? So I definitely understand why they went by Brent.
2 years later, in October of 1978, the Springfords welcomed their daughter. They named her Robin. Because of this loss they already lived through, and of course, because they could afford it, they spoiled Brent Jr. and Robin. There wasn't anything they wouldn't do for them, but at the same time, they made sure the kids had opportunities that shaped them into well-rounded, respectful, intelligent, hardworking children.
I think so we don't keep confusing anyone, we're going to just call the dad, Brent Sr., Mr. Springford, and we'll call his son Brent because we're going to be saying Brent a lot. And just so there's no confusion, you'll know who we are referring to going forward. They raised the children with culture. Summers were spent in Mexico so the kids could hear Spanish from native speakers and understand the world was bigger than Alabama. Even though church wasn't something they did every week, the children did go to Sunday schools with their housekeeper. It was about seeing how other people lived, loved, and worshiped. And then there was the house, the mansion at 1944 South Whole Street. It had a life of its own. It was gorgeous. I like to call it a manor. It had 4 bedrooms, 3.5 bathrooms. It was an estate in Montgomery's iconic Garden District. And I'm reading right from Zillow. It's described as over an acre of beautifully curated grounds, complete with a resort-style saltwater pool, lush landscaping, and a detached guest house in the back of the property for ultimate flexibility. The home is tucked behind private gates and surrounded by greenery. The property offers a sense of tranquility that feels worlds away while still being right in the heart of the city. The main house offers architectural elements that tell a story: leaded glass windows, arched doorways, hardwood floors, and 4 original fireplaces. Grand entertaining spaces flow effortlessly from the elegant dining room and formal living area to the cozy library and sun-drenched garden room that opens to the backyard oasis. And then, of course, there's a guest suite, all with its own kitchen, dining area, living room, bedroom, and bathroom. What are they usually called? Like mother-in-law quarters? And this house had a 3-car garage and a long driveway on the right side of the home. It took up 2 lots. There actually wasn't a house to the left of this house because that was actually part of their yard. It was definitely one of the biggest houses on that block.
The Garden District is one of the city's most historic neighborhoods, covering roughly 315 acres just south of downtown. It was known for its wide tree-lined streets and its rows of late 19th and early 20th century homes. Many of these houses had deep porches, tall columns, and facades that showed off an earlier era of Southern grandeur. The neighborhood was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1984, and it carried a real sense of pride and distinction for the people who lived there.
The Springford Mansion was more than just a house. This was a statement. The property had once been a 1920s residence, and then later it was restored and expanded into the kind of home that stood out, even among the district's most elegant. Records show that this property was purchased by the Springfords in 1977 for around $380,000. Now that doesn't sound like much, but back then, that was $1.6 million by today's standards. But that was just a little over 1 month income for this couple. Can you even imagine?
Plus, they put a lot of money into this home. They were always renovating, constantly updating it with new projects and design elements, especially because Charlotte loved keeping up with the current trends and took real pride in her space. The house was absolutely a reflection of their success, and they hosted a lot of events there. It was a place for parties.
Yeah, it was like the place to go because this was not about small parties. We're talking hundreds of people, sophisticated black tie events, summers with pool parties and 4th of July sparklers, and fall meant soups were simmering in the kitchen, and Thanksgiving was all about the family gathering around a big table filled with food and surrounded by loved ones. And Christmas, that was Charlotte's Olympics. She decorated from top to bottom, garlands all over the railings, gifts wrapped early and stacked precisely around their beautiful tree. They entertained with that effortless Southern hospitality, and together, Mr. and Mrs. Springford embodied success and generosity. They were active in civic organizations, and they were deeply devoted to helping others. To those who knew them, the Springfords represented the best of Montgomery's professional and social life.
And they were powerful too. The couple built important connections and friendships, even staying close with civil rights activists Morris Dees. Appearances mattered, and that meant rules. Rules that couldn't be broken if they wanted to stay in the community's good graces. They had a reputation to uphold, and it was always a tricky balance between having enough money to do anything they wanted and knowing when to rein things in so they didn't go off the rails.
Right. I mean, they're human, right? And Mr. Springford was a little bit of a risk taker. He enjoyed drinking just a little too much and then going out in the town with his buddies and bar hopping. And he also liked fast cars, and those things did not mix. So, of course, Charlotte put guardrails on his life. This was a woman who had lost her family in a fire. She had paranoia about things, and she wasn't about to let anything happen to her husband and her other children. She would tell Mr. Springford when enough was enough. And there was a time that he wanted a motorcycle. She basically told him, if you get one, I will divorce you. And remember, he's working for the company that her family left behind. So I think he was willing to make compromises. He was able to become a black belt in karate, and he did carry a firearm, but I guess that was more for protection than anything else. But once he came home, that firearm had to be secured immediately. And I thought it was interesting what you can learn about a marriage from the boundaries that they keep. It was almost like a business transaction. Now, the kids grew up in a home that was both polished and warm. You could sit on the couch and play, and you'd have your wet hair and maybe your wet bathing suit on from the pool. And then when you got up, someone, the housekeeper, would swoop in and straighten the pillows and the magazines, almost like you were never even there.
But Charlotte did allow Mr. Springford to get a plane. He took lessons and became a pilot so he could take it out every now and then.
Exactly, but Charlotte secretly took lessons on her own because she wanted to make sure she could fly that plane in the event something catastrophic occurred. She always had a backup plan to protect her family.
And the whole family traveled the world together, and both children attended Montgomery Academy, a private school that only the wealthiest families could afford.
The kids would go shooting with their father. They would go camping together, skiing, playing golf, dance lessons, and debate class, something Charlotte won awards for. She was a master at debating, but they also had rules, a lot of them, strict ones, when they had to come home and be ready to sit down for a family dinner, and who they could socialize with, and the grades they were expected to maintain.
They were also expected to be good at sports and stay involved. Brent played baseball, tennis, and ran track at high school. Both he and Robin were A students in advanced classes, all-American, well-rounded, gifted kids who always stood out.
But their parents wouldn't have accepted anything less anyway.
Right. But meanwhile, Robin had her sights set on Vanderbilt University. And of course, she got in. But her parents would have made a charitable contribution if they needed to. But Robin managed it on her own. Brent had a harder time. His grades weren't as strong, and he wanted to go to Cornell or Dartmouth, but both schools rejected his applications. However, they were able to pull some strings at Vanderbilt, and Brent ended up there with his sister.
Both Robin and Brent were generous and charitable, and they got that from their mother, who was always interested in helping the less fortunate and minorities and anyone who was struggling. Where she saw a need that she could help, she filled it.
And with that being instilled in him, Brent was very altruistic by nature. He, more than Robin, became more spiritual, and he didn't feel like Vanderbilt was a good fit for him.
He thought he would be better at a school that offered religious studies, and after 2 years at Vanderbilt, he took a hiatus and he traveled across the United States, and whenever he was home, then he would come back and help his dad at the Pepsi company.
And eventually, he enrolled at Mesoamerica University in Mexico, a place he and his parents had spent a lot of time when they were kids. He was fluent in Spanish, and he could read it, write it, and speak it, so it felt natural for him. But his professors back at Vanderbilt were disappointed he wasn't returning because he was such an extraordinary student, but his heart just wasn't in it. After some time, he transferred from Mexico to Oberlin College in Ohio to study religion.
I think we've pretty much recapped the Springfords' life and their children's lives. But eventually, Robin graduated from Vanderbilt. She met a fellow student named Greg Crouch, and they started dating and eventually got engaged. And by 2004, in October, they had a beautiful wedding. It was such a huge milestone. And that fall was the first time that the Springfords decided they weren't going to have Thanksgiving at their mansion in Montgomery. They were going to go to Birmingham to their daughter's new house for Thanksgiving.
But by that time, Brent had moved out to Colorado, and he had been living there for a few years, and he wasn't going to make it back home for the holidays. He had actually gotten married, and he and his wife Carolyn were spending the season with her family.
Right. By 2004, the Springford family traditions had started to bend a little bit, like many families do as their children are now adults with their own families. So let's go back to Thanksgiving and pause there for a moment, because it's right where we left off in the beginning. That year, it was all about Robin. As her mother, Charlotte, used to take on the role of party host, Robin was taking the lead at her table in Birmingham. New husband, new house, new traditions being built. And I know a lot of families will switch. Like one year, they'll be at their son's house for Thanksgiving. Another, they'll be at their daughter's, and so on and so forth. It meant so much to Robin. She really wanted to impress her mom, and she did. It was such a lovely time. Charlotte complimented Robin's cooking. Mr. Springford jumped into his storytelling mode, and Robin having her mom, her dad, and her Aunt Lois there felt so special. She would have never imagined this would be the very last time that she would see her parents alive.
Mr. and Mrs. Springford mentioned that their plan was to make the 90-mile drive back home and then head to their Florida condo in the morning, so they decided to get on the road before the turkey started making them too sleepy to drive. Robin thought about riding back to Montgomery with them to spend the night, but at the very last minute, she changed her mind and decided not to go. The Springfords were having work done on their home, another project just in time for the new year. This time, it was a new kitchen. The contractor, Michael Shelton, and his crew had just finished painting the cabinets yellow and laying matching tile the week before. Michael had worked with the Springfords for almost a decade. He was trustworthy, and they'd given him keys and the alarm code so he can come and go as needed. He was planning to be there the next morning to keep working, and the Springfords were hoping the project would be finished by the time they got back from Florida and before Christmas.
Charlotte had already been wrapping Christmas gifts. They were scattered all over the downstairs area of the house, ready to be put under the tree right when it went up. But that night, they hugged Robin goodbye, told her that they'd let her know when they made it home safe, and left like it was just any other night. The drive home was familiar. They jumped into Mr. Springford's Jaguar, and in an hour and a half, they were back in Montgomery. The garden district looked like a postcard. Wreaths on the doors, Christmas trees twinkling from windows, and once inside, they do last-minute chores and put their bags in their car for their trip the next morning. And then they were off to bed.
The next day, Friday, November 26th, early in the morning, Michael and his crew arrived at the Springfords' home. They parked on the street and walked up the driveway to the garage where they stored their tools on Wednesday before the holiday. He punched in the alarm code but noticed the reset light, usually on, wasn't lit this time. He just made mental note of it, figuring that maybe Mr. Springford knew the contractors would be coming that morning and didn't bother setting the alarm when they left for Florida. As expected, the Jaguar wasn't parked in its usual spot in the garage bay. What did stand out, though, was the state of the garage itself. All their tools were still there, but the place looked like it had been turned upside down. Drawers were pulled out, papers were scattered everywhere. They all knew Mr. Springford was extremely organized and would never have left things in such a mess. Maybe Michael thought he'd been looking for something at the last minute before hitting the road and just hadn't had time to put everything back. So with that, Michael moved on. He and his crew had keys to the house, so they headed to the glass door in the back that opened into the garden room near the kitchen. That way, they could bring in their tools and the tiles easily without having to walk through the entire house. But the deadbolt had been locked from the inside, and its key only worked on the bottom handle. And this wasn't all that unusual. It had happened a few times before. Out of habit, one of the Springfords would have locked the door before leaving, and Michael would wind up stuck outside. So he did what he'd done in the past. He made a quick call to Pepsi Cola to reach one of the managers, Mr. Armstrong.
And Mr. Armstrong took over whenever Mr. Springford wasn't in town. He also coincidentally owned the company that Michael worked for, and he was managing the renovations at the Springford's home. So he gave Michael and the crew permission to simply remove one of the glass sections of the door so he could slip his arm inside and unlock the deadbolt inside. No reason to bother the Springfords on their Florida trip. Once inside, they yell for Mr. and Mrs. Springford or for the housekeeper just to see if anyone's inside. There was no answer. Downstairs, the house looks paused mid-project. The kitchen floor had been partially stripped in preparation for the new tile. There were a number of linen and things, plastic bags scattered around with new kitchen items inside, and holiday gifts were already wrapped and waiting for Christmas. As they walked by a small office space that's right to the back of the stairwell, they saw more disorder. It wasn't usual for the Springfords. It was similar to the way that the garage looked, very out of place.
And at this point, Michael could tell something was off. So he went through every room downstairs to see if there were any clues about what might have happened. All he found was more confirmation that something had happened. The library and the garden room, which was sort of an indoor patio area, were both in disarray. It looked like someone had been rummaging through drawers, closets, and desks, searching for something.
Well, the Springfords could have been in a hurry to leave, like he said, and maybe they misplaced something and they wanted to make good time, so they didn't put anything back.
Yes, this was one of the first things Michael considered, but this wasn't the first time the family had gone out of town. And they were not the type to leave things tossed around like this. They had far more respect for their living area than that. It actually looked like it was a burglary, like someone had been watching the house and knew that the Springfords had left town. They knew it would be empty and slipped inside to steal something. Michael and his crew started up the stairs to check on the second floor for more rooms that might have been rifled through, but they didn't even make it to the landing before they saw something shocking. It was blood.
They stopped, and Michael yelled to go back down, and he immediately let his manager, Mr. Armstrong, know that something had gone terribly wrong at the Springfords. He didn't proceed upstairs, so he didn't know what exactly happened, but he just knew that it was bad. Mr. Armstrong flew over there and went straight up the stairs and saw the blood for himself. There was no mistaking it. It was soaked into the carpet. It looked like a rug had been tossed on top to attempt to hide it, but there was way too much, and it was no good. He called 911 immediately, and all he kept repeating was, "It's so much blood. There's a lot of blood. There's a lot of blood." And within minutes, the police were on the scene.
Patrol cars lined the block and barricaded the road. Yellow tape stretched across the lawn, and investigators and crime scene techs moved in wearing paper booties, gloves, everything you'd expect at a major crime scene. Montgomery's mayor, Bobby Bright, was notified and came out, as he always did for homicides, without yet knowing who had been hurt. And because the Springfords were so well known in the area, it was that much more shocking for him to realize he was arriving at their house.
That must have been crazy, seeing your friend's house as a crime scene.
Yeah, when officers arrived, they went up to the landing where Michael had said he had saw blood, and they found the cream-colored carpet completely saturated in red. They lifted a rug that had clearly been thrown over the stain, and underneath it, they could see just how badly the carpet was soaked. There were smears and drag marks and what looked like droplets leading into one of the smaller bedrooms, the room that Robin used to stay in. And it was clear that someone who was already badly wounded had run into that room, probably trying to escape from their attacker.
It was bad. It was really bad. And inside Robin's closet was the body of a man lying face up, neck exposed and slit clean across. Blood was everywhere, on the ceiling, the walls, cast-off spray from a weapon, and it doesn't take long to find two weapons that can be responsible. A large 6-inch serrated kitchen knife and a bloodied handle of what could have been a heavy wooden stake or an axe handle that was lying nearby. Around the room were clues as to what those weapons came into contact with. Teeth, tissue, skull fragments, wads of hair. This was an extreme struggle, a fight to the death. And also, it didn't take long to know who the man was in the closet. Winston Brent Springford Sr., Mr. Springford, still wearing his Thanksgiving outfit, a brown shirt with matching pants, which had both of his pockets pulled inside out. He still had on his shoes and even an expensive watch. But the killer must have been looking for something, with so many rooms rummaged through and even his pockets searched. But for what? There was so much still in the home. What was this monster wanting from these people?
Sadly, it wasn't just 62-year-old Mr. Springford who was found dead. His 60-year-old wife, Charlotte, was also lying face up near the closet in their large primary bedroom. She was still in her Thanksgiving outfit as well, her blue shirt, brown vest, and dark green pants and navy jacket. Her watch hadn't been taken, but it had been removed from her wrist and was lying nearby, its face shattered in a pool of blood. This area was just as bloody as the one outside. There was cast off everywhere on the walls, the ceiling, the furniture. She'd been wedged between one of the bedroom walls and the bed. She was just inches from one of the phones in the room, but it looked like she had been pulled back the moment she got close enough to try to call for help.
Yeah, there was a trail of blood from where the phone was to where she ended up. And it showed she was dragged away from the phone and then brutally slashed with a knife and beaten badly with another blunt object. She too had her neck slit straight across in the front. It seemed like her shoes had come off in the struggle, and only one of her boots was found alongside a Louis Vuitton bag, which was turned inside out and rummaged through. The room was practically turned upside down. Drawers opened, things strewn around the room, papers, random items tossed on the ground, lamps hanging from their cords and dangling off the side of dressers. There were literally holes in the drywall, like the attacker had thrown a punch and then missed as they violently attacked her in her own bedroom, a place where I am sure she had always felt safe. And I know we say this in so many other cases, but the thing is, it can be true in many of them because the ones we talk about are usually the worst. They're the ones that someone remembers because they can't shake the vision of what they saw. And seasoned officials in this case were shaken. They described blood in every direction, far more than they'd ever encountered in their entire careers. Some had never even been to a crime scene that was this gruesome. And what that told investigators was this was overkill. The injuries sustained could have killed them 2 times over. And the smell is something that would stick with them. It was so overpowering, the metallic smell filling this home.
And who they were made it even more shocking. When investigators and officials learned that it was the Springfords who had been murdered, they just couldn't believe it. But because their wealth was so well known, it wasn't outside the realm of possibility, especially during the holiday season, that someone might have targeted them for their money. But what was interesting was that there were still valuables in the house, cash in different safes on the property, and 2 vehicles, a Chevy Caprice and a Chevy Silverado, were still there as well. However, the 1998 black Jaguar registered to the Pepsi bottling company wasn't there. And now we know that the Springfords hadn't been driving it as planned. So the question became, could this have been someone from Mr. Springford's company, a former employee with a grudge? An executive who felt overlooked and snapped?
Or could it be someone close to them? Because when they checked, they didn't see any obvious signs of forced entry. So could it have been the contractors? Maybe Michael pretended to stumble upon the scene. I mean, he did have the key to the house and he could have pretended, oh, I'm locked out. And then he sees all this carnage. He would know where all the valuables were. So why would he have to rummage through things? So that didn't really make sense. But these were the theories that were going through investigators' minds. It could have been staged, and maybe it wasn't a burglary, but a theft of something specific. Something that maybe they wouldn't have known was gone, and only the Springfords knew was there.
But they were far from done investigating the entire property. This was a big house, and they had to search every inch of it inside and out, which was going to take time. Eventually, they believed they'd found a possible point of entry, and surprisingly, it was on the 2nd story.
And that's always been something that I've been terrified of. When I've been living in a condo or a townhouse, something that had maybe a 2nd story, my biggest fear was that someone would get onto the balcony, like they would scale a wall, they would pry open my patio door and somehow get inside.
Well, your fear would have been valid in this case, because in the room that had been Robin's room before she moved out, investigators found a broken window. They could tell it had been broken from the outside since the glass was scattered across the floor inside the room. What was interesting though was that the perpetrator had tried to hide the fact that the window was broken. They'd pulled the blinds down over it and then stacked some bedding and even a couple speakers in front of the blinds, almost like they were trying to keep them from moving if the wind blew. They also found what looked like some kind of pruning saw, and from the outside, they could see how the perpetrator had gotten to the 2nd story. There were shoe scuff marks on one of the pillars. They also noticed shoe prints in the dirt that led into the backyard, which they also followed. And they found a few planters on the property that had been disturbed.
So what about the alarm system? Because I thought they had an entire security system that had to be disabled, because I remember Michael used a code to get in. So how did the attacker gain access without setting it off?
And that's a really good question. And it was exactly what investigators were wondering too, until they spotted a note on the front door that had been left by the local police.
Wait, so the police had come there?
Well, yeah, this was a pretty big oversight on the officers' part. A couple of them had come out to the house in the middle of the night on Friday, just hours after the Springfords had gotten home from driving back from Robin's place. They arrived sometime around 6:15, and now it was after 2 in the morning. According to the note, the officers had come out because the alarm had gone off, but after looking around and not seeing any signs of forced entry or hearing anything inside, they knocked, got no answer, and then they just went back on patrol, leaving only the note behind.
Okay, so now were the investigators thinking that was the attacker coming inside the house and he set off the alarm at 2 a.m.?
Most likely, yes. The alarm had originally been set at 5:30 p.m. on Wednesday, which was lined up when the Springfords would have left to drive to Robin's and stay the night so they could go to her Thanksgiving lunch on Thursday. So they probably set it again when they got back into town on Thursday night, went to bed, and then someone broke in.
But wait a minute. To me, that doesn't line up because the Springfords were still wearing what they wore to Robin's for Thanksgiving. So they hadn't gone to sleep because they wouldn't have been wearing the same clothes. So I thought that was interesting. Why would they still have their clothes on at 2 a.m.? I mean, they were packing to leave. I know that because they were leaving the next morning, but they wanted to get on their drive home so they could get to bed early and get up and take that drive to Florida. So it's almost as though somebody was like already in there waiting for them. So I don't know why it would go off at 2 a.m.
That could be the case, but at this point, a be on the lookout alert went out locally for Mr. Springford's black Jaguar, the make, the model, and license plate number. Patrol units all across Alabama started pulling over cars that matched the description, assuming the killer had used it as a getaway car.
Or it could have been another thing to steal because that's a really nice car.
Exactly. They also started going door to door asking neighbors if they'd heard or seen anything unusual. But remember, the Springford's house had almost a full empty lot on its left, so there wasn't an immediate neighbor over there. On the right side, though, closest to the garage, there was a neighbor, and there were a few more across the street who were close enough to possibly notice something.
And let me guess, no one they interviewed had any information.
That's right. It was Thanksgiving, and families were either out of town or busy hosting parties, so nobody was really paying attention to anything unusual. And when investigators asked if anyone heard anything in the middle of the night, most neighbors said they'd already been in bed.
Oh, and then information came from local police. They pulled up a report when they were running the license plate of the Springford's Jaguar, and it turned out he actually got pulled over right near the house for speeding right when he was coming back. And this was around 6 p.m. He was already close to his house, but that was the last record of anyone seeing them alive and also the last record of his car. But then they get another hit. I think it was a traffic camera that spotted the license plate on the highway in Millbrook, which is about 20 minutes away from the Springford's house. And this was in the early morning hours of Friday. So now that lined up with the killer leaving the scene in the early morning after the Springfords were dead.
And this was later backed up by a newspaper delivery man who said he'd been on the Springford street around 2 a.m., dropping off their paper when he saw the black Jaguar pulling out of the driveway behind him. As he continued his route, driving slowly so he could toss the newspapers, the Jaguar stayed right behind him without ever passing. He thought that was strange, so he flipped on the hazard lights to signal basically, "Hey, I'm not going anywhere, go around me." But the car kept following him.
So you see, someone did set off the alarm when they were leaving because that matches the time that it went off. When the car finally passes, the newspaper guy looks over and he sees the driver. He said the driver had long hair and that his eyes looked like they were really, really red and bloodshot. And this guy looked like he was maybe in his 30s. And then on Monday, November 29th, just 4 days after the murders, they actually locate the Jaguar. It's found abandoned on the side of the road in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is over 11 hours away. And when the police get there to investigate, they see that the car still has the keys in the ignition, and they conduct an inventory of what's inside and discover bags of jewelry that match the description of what Mrs. Springford had in her bedroom closet.
Kind of odd they didn't take that with them.
I was thinking the same thing, but apparently when the jewelry was examined later on, they found out that it was things like cubic zirconia. It wasn't the expensive stuff because she kept that in her safes. And that was another thing. There were multiple safes in this house that were never taken and they weren't even broken into or attempted to be broken into. So I think we need to go back because it's important to note that Robin and Brent had to be notified of their parents' murders, which is never an easy task, but one that has to be done. They were obviously also hoping that the children could give them information about maybe anyone that would want to hurt their parents, or maybe they would have information about known enemies, business deals gone wrong, anything that could lead to information regarding someone dangerous who they may have crossed paths with. They reach out to Robin, and they're careful not to reveal too many details about the brutality of the scene, but they told her parents had been found dead. She was shocked more than anything. All the thoughts going through her head, the fact that she was supposed to drive back with them and spend the night just to have a little extra time with her parents before their trip to Florida, and she didn't. And that type of guilt can sink in, but also the thought of, oh my God, I could have been killed too. So that's really hard to think about. Robin and her husband decide that it's probably best for them not to be at their home in case the entire family had been targeted. So they left and stayed with friends until further notice.
Investigators were also trying to get in touch with Brent, who we mentioned earlier was living in Colorado with his wife, Carolyn, and her children.
She told them that she did get a call from her brother back on Sunday, so after Thanksgiving and after she got word that her parents were dead, but she couldn't answer it. She was too shocked and still grieving. However, she explained she doesn't talk to Brent on a regular basis, usually just around milestones like her engagement or around the holidays. So she figured he was calling just to wish her a happy Thanksgiving.
She said he hadn't been back that way for at least a couple of years, but whenever he did call, it was because he needed something, especially from his parents.
Yeah. And Robin explained that her mom and dad were at the point where they truly felt that now he was 27 years old, he was an adult that should be able to take care of himself, to be responsible for his own expenses. And they had recently made the tough decision to cancel his credit cards that were tied to the Springford's bank account.
I mean, that's been a motive in other cases. So Robin, just trying to help and offer any information or angle that she could, said maybe her brother had gotten really upset about not having any financial help that he used to, and maybe he'd gone into some kind of rage.
Yeah, that has happened, even in cases that we've done before. And she wasn't the only one to mention Brent and his recent issues with his parents. Sally, a close friend of Charlotte's, told investigators something similar, that even as recently as a week before she was killed, Charlotte told Sally that Brent had called saying that he was in desperate need of food for his family, that they were struggling to make ends meet, and he may need to resort to doing something illegal to get money or even steal food. Charlotte was at her wit's end. It was just weeks before this that she caught her son trying to use one of their checks for about $10,000. It was flagged before the money was taken out of her account.
This wasn't the first time Brent had forged checks or begged for money or even asked for other things like cars, which they bought for him, and even whole properties. His parents did try to help out, especially once Carolyn was in the picture, because they knew that she had children and was doing her best to support Brent whenever he got himself into a bad situation.
Yeah, it was actually Charlotte and Carolyn that would talk on the phone all the time about what to do and how Brent was doing and how he could get a job and how things could be easier for them. Both Carolyn and Charlotte had charity in common. They both worked hard to provide for people who were in worse situations. So there was a little bit of a bond between the two women, even though they had only met once before. Charlotte really respected Carolyn for trying to help Brent and the things she had done for others. And even though Robin said that Brent hadn't been back home in a couple of years, she wasn't aware of what Charlotte was telling some of her closest friends. In actuality, Brent had come unannounced to the Springfords' home back in September, so just a couple months before the killings. He had tried to convince his parents to keep providing for him.
There's a lot at play here, but investigators are used to families having drama and to family members being possible suspects. The people closest to a murder victim always have been looked at as a person of interest until they could be ruled out. And even though all of that sounded like a mess and a tough situation for Charlotte and Mr. Springford, the investigators still had to cast their net wider. They hadn't even spoken to Brent yet to hear his side. They didn't know where he'd been during the killings, and for all they knew, he could have had a solid alibi.
But they were already getting background information on him from everyone who knew this family. And Brent really didn't fit the profile. He was bright, he was well-traveled, from a prosperous family, exploring biblical studies, and even interested in becoming a monk. That's a life of peace and higher purpose. But that isn't always accepted in families. And he became somewhat of an outcast in his. They learn about Brent's school years where he excelled and he chased meaning off campus. They hear about people who remember him as a social magnetic teenager, spiritual programs, retreats, and eventually a relationship with Carolyn Scout, who friends describe in competing ways as someone who started as more of a caretaker and a counselor, a woman with influence, not just someone Brent was in love with. Probably because she was 24 years older than him, something else that people kind of tend to have a problem with at times. And that was actually who answered the phone and later the door to their Colorado home when investigators showed up.
They called Brent's house, but no one answered, so they left messages. And of course, they didn't say why they were calling. That's not the way anyone should find out that their parents are dead.
However, they did let them know that it was an important matter involving his parents, so they needed to call back as soon as possible.
And Carolyn was the one who got the messages and called back. The investigators asked if Brent was there, where she'd last seen him, and where he'd been on Thanksgiving. She told them Brett had stayed home sick through the holiday and then went hiking at Horsetooth Canyon and later spent Thanksgiving dinner with her family. Now he was out shopping for Christmas gifts. She'd drop him off, but as soon as she picked him up, she'd tell him to call him.
But hours later, that same Saturday, November 27th, he does call back. He's on the road with Carolyn and inquires about what their call was in regard to. They replied that there was a situation that had occurred involving his family. Now, that's not exactly detailed enough for most people to ascertain that someone is dead. He's quiet. He's waiting for more information. Instead, they begin questioning him about his whereabouts during the hours leading up to and after his parents were killed, without telling him why they were asking. Now, I would be confused. I'd be like, why does it matter where I was? What's going on?
I mean, when you get a call from the police saying your parents have been in a situation,
Yeah,
usually,
it's usually not a good thing.
yeah.
But I'm wondering, had his parents ever been in other situations before? Probably not.
Brent explained that he'd been sick and called out of work that week, and while he had thought about going home for Thanksgiving, he stayed in Colorado so he wouldn't pass his illness along. He said he had dinner with his wife and her kids, and then, as part of tradition, and also to avoid being too close to anyone while he was feeling so bad, he went hiking near Fort Collins to get out of the house. The investigators didn't want to give him the heartbreaking news over the phone, so they thanked him and ended the phone call. And then a couple of detectives boarded a plane to Colorado.
Here's my question though. Wouldn't you be asking, and we just went over this, like, what's going on with my parents?
Right.
Wouldn't you be calling your family members and saying like, hey, did you get a call from the police? None of that happened. Instead, a day later, the detectives are outside his door telling Carolyn, who was the only one home at the time, that Brent's parents were killed. She breaks down. She's crying. She's asking, how did this happen? And that's when they explain that they are investigating a murder. She's cooperative. She made sure to give them as much detail as possible about what she knew and the last time she spoke to Charlotte. She explained they were really close. They talked very regularly, and she told them that the last time she spoke to Charlotte was on Wednesday. But she hadn't been able to get in touch with her ever since. She'd even called around and considered having a welfare check conducted at the house because she thought it was really weird that it's during the holidays and Charlotte didn't even call them.
Since they already had Carolyn in front of them, they decided to press her for more details about Brent's whereabouts. She repeated that Brent had Thanksgiving dinner with her on Thursday night and that he'd been home on Wednesday too. But when they asked if he'd left at any point on Thursday, even just for a few hours, she paused to think. She remembered looking outside, noticing that his black Volkswagen Jetta wasn't in the driveway. And that was sometime before the morning on Thanksgiving. So that would have been sometime in the middle of the night on Wednesday.
And she said, now that she thought about it, he wasn't home much on Thanksgiving Day because he was sick and he wanted to be out of the stuffy house, but he was there by dinner time. So that meant he was gone for hours on Thanksgiving.
And that would make sense because Thanksgiving was Thursday and the window investigators were working with was between 6:30 p.m. and 2 a.m. heading into Friday.
Right. So there were hours there unaccounted for in their perspective. And where was Brent now? Carolyn said, actually, I don't know. He left a few hours ago, maybe to run some errands or to go shopping. Finally, on Monday, Carolyn goes to the local sheriff's office for a formal interview where she repeats everything so that it can be recorded. But this time, she seems to not recall things and even starts to shift some timelines. Now she tells them she doesn't even know if she saw Brent on Thanksgiving at all, and that she only assumed he was home on Wednesday because the house was cleaned, and she knew that she didn't clean the house. She did say, however, that she picked him up on Saturday from the mall in Boulder when he called her from a payphone. That was when he used her cell to call back the detectives while they were on the road. So I'm like, wait, so many questions here. Like, where was his car? But I guess maybe she dropped him off. I was so confused. But according to this account, he hadn't been home from Wednesday until Saturday. And that is completely different. That gave him plenty of time to carry out the killings. He was treated for dehydration and symptoms of the flu on Saturday night at a hospital in Fort Collins. So now they can track that to his medical records. But they have a lot of questions, as I'm sure you do as well.
So they finally tracked him down and sat with him that night. And when they told him what had happened to his parents, he broke down and started to cry. He bent forward with his elbows on his knees and his head hanging down. And that's when he noticed the scratch on his forehead and what looked like a black eye under his right eye. They asked him about those injuries later, and he said that he didn't even remember having them. If he did, they were old. He denied having anything to do with what happened to his parents. He explained that he'd called in sick to work on Monday and had tried to keep his distance from Carolyn and the kids so he wouldn't pass his illness along. On Thanksgiving, he said he went hiking by himself, ate dinner alone away from his family out behind this house, and spent Friday out in the garage area. Then on Saturday, he went shopping.
It's kind of like a broken record. It's the same story over and over again with just minor details changed. I guess he also said that the relationship with his parents was a supportive one, that financially they provided for him. But of course, nothing is perfect, and they did have their bad times as well. And he said recently they had grown apart, but he had moved away, so they weren't physically close, but he said they were in constant contact. At the same time, detectives were talking to Carolyn's children, hoping that their recollections may help clarify Brent's movements during the holiday week. Their accounts, however, were inconsistent. One child said they remembered seeing him briefly at the end of Thanksgiving dinner. Another one said he looked so different when he came in that they barely recognized him at all. His normally long, shaggy hair had been cut short and neatly trimmed. And that's interesting because when he's being interviewed, he has more of a buzz cut. And his wife mentioned that was done in the last couple of days.
He'd always had long hair before this, and remember, the newspaper delivery man said they saw a guy with long hair driving the black Jaguar.
Exactly. But Brent said him cutting his hair was just because he was bored of the old style. But the timing is too coincidental. But there's no proof that Brent did anything, so they released him and Caroline to go back home. The news had gone wild by this point. It was featured on Fox News, which is when it was announced that reporters believed Brent was being investigated as a person of interest. The investigators were asking the public for any information regarding the Springfords murder. And on Sunday, November 28th, the autopsies were finally conducted. Charlotte and Brent Sr. both died from a combination of blunt force head injuries and sharp force wounds to the neck. Charlotte's forearm and wrist were broken, which suggested that she was trying to block the blows from her attackers, and her watch face had been shattered, which we mentioned. But what was so eerie was that this watch stopped at 6:28 p.m. So now they knew basically the time that this woman died. Her teeth had been shattered, and there were numerous wounds on her face and her head.
As for Mr. Springford, the exam showed that he had been stabbed at least 6 times in the abdomen with no defensive wounds, meaning that he had been ambushed. His throat had also been slit. It was a brutal crime, which you could probably already tell from how the scene looked. They both bled out in their own home, defenseless and unable to fight back.
Someone with rage did this. And then the case gets even stranger. About a week later, a call comes in, but not to detectives, to a newsroom, a local station back in Montgomery, Alabama, back where the killings actually occurred. And the caller identifies himself as Winston Brent Springford Jr., so Brent. And he says he's devastated. The detectives are hounding him, that he just lost his parents, and now they're treating him like a suspect. He says, "I'm not in hiding. I just need help." And he insists on his innocence. The newsroom verifies the call's origin. And guess where it's from?
Where?
A psychiatric facility in Colorado, the Mountain Crest Behavioral Health Clinic. He's checked himself into the facility because he's unwell at the news of what happened to his parents and, of course, being treated disrespectfully in his perspective. Now, the detectives can't interview him while he's under observation. So instead, they talk to more people who knew him and Carolyn. And this is where I feel like things get even more interesting because I like diving into someone's history. Recall how some people were not really fans of Carolyn? That's because some people thought she may be taking advantage of the fact that Brent came from wealth. And we're going to get there because investigators are interested to know more. But first, let's focus on Brent himself and know his path and how it even crossed with this woman who's actually 24 years older than him. And she had a 13-year-old and a 20-year-old child, meaning there was a child that was only 4 years younger than Brent when he married this woman.
You might not think it's that big of a deal on its own, but people were concerned about why Carolyn seemed so interested in Brent in the first place. And here's what investigators were starting to piece up together about his past and the way that he grew up.
This is when you literally start to realize when people say, "Oh, you have no idea what's going on behind closed doors." And that is so true because from the outside, he truly did look like the all-American teenager, but Brent Jr. was different from the beginning. From early childhood, he carried an intense sense of meaning. By preschool, he was already telling his mother elaborate stories that he had a previous life and he was reincarnated. He was only 3 and he was talking about frontiers and working on a ranch and then a violent death. He'd been killed in his past life. Yeah, it's strange, but then it's also pretty fascinating. And he got into this whole belief that he was here for a higher purpose, which isn't really all that odd. Yet the interest wasn't just a phase. By high school, he was writing papers about reincarnation and soaking up anything that hinted at the spiritual. You can kind of call it being obsessed at this point. And even his sister started writing papers about it. I think both him, his sister, and his mom believed Brent's story. And I mean, why not? How could a 3-year-old go into that much detail if it wasn't true?
Right, and in this wealthy family, Brent's home life gave him plenty of room to experiment. The Springford house was loving and comfortable, but also pretty permissive. Brent wasn't exactly disciplined. Friends were always welcome, curfews were loose, and teen parties sometimes involved alcohol, along with him bringing girls into his locked bedroom, alone. By 15, he was drinking, partaking in marijuana, and occasionally psychedelics. But none of that kept him from being successful at academics. Montgomery Academy Athletics, track, baseball, tennis, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, 6 AP classes, and 4 honors courses, a 3.6 GPA, and teachers who praised his writing.
And nothing we just mentioned is that out of the ordinary for most high school students. He stood out. He liked wearing suits and dressing sharp. He liked a crowd and pulling quiet classmates into his circle, and no one felt left out when they were around him. At home, he would host parties of his own, sometimes wearing a tuxedo, cooking for his friends, and turning his room into what his friends jokingly called the pot den. He also picked up the electric guitar and he filled in with local bands. All pretty normal and maybe even extraordinary. He was charismatic and very talented.
The attention didn't harm his ego. He openly admitted he'd been given every advantage and that things came easily to him, but the humility would come later, if it came at all. And materially, it definitely showed. At 16, his father bought him a brand new red IROC Z Camaro, and he'd tear around town at over 100 miles an hour, showing it off. And the family dynamic had its contrasts. Even though his dad provided for him and spoiled him, Brent was a mama's boy, and Charlotte and Brent Jr. were close. She took him on little trips and even confided in her about things he wouldn't tell other people, especially his father.
It definitely started to feel like his father expected him to be really masculine and kind of carry the torch and be a strong leader. And it wasn't as though Brent couldn't fill those shoes, but he just had a softer side to him. And he would tell his mom certain things that would emotionally affect her because she was torn between wanting her husband to have a good relationship with her son, but also feeling as though Brent felt pressured to do what his father wanted. In middle school, he admitted to his mom he felt depressed, but he refused to go see a doctor.
And with his dad, the bond was there, but it felt more conditional. It was measured against performance and grit. And in temperament, people saw more of Charlotte and Brent, sensitive, idealistic, a dreamer with big ideas. And the pressure wasn't just about succeeding, it was also about who was in his life. Brent wanted things to feel like they were his idea, his choice, but so much of it felt orchestrated by his parents. For example, when it came to dating, there was this one girl who mattered more than the rest, and let's call her Brittany Anderson for privacy. They'd known each other since kindergarten, and by high school, they shifted from friends to inseparable, riding the bus together to debate tournaments and even having prom after party at his house because he wanted her at the center of the night. Both of the families approved. The parents spent time together, ran in the same social circles. They were both wealthy and connected. Naturally, Mr. and Mrs. Springford openly pictured Brittany as their future daughter-in-law.
Right, but it almost felt as though from the very beginning, these two families were sort of arranging this between their children.
Sure.
Brittany was the one person that over time knew everything about Brent. She was his constant. And that anchor really mattered in his life when things began to shift. So many teenagers go through really drastic changes from high school into college, and Brent was no exception. No matter how much money his parents had, he still had to go through the hormonal changes, the personality changes, and trying to struggle to figure out how to fit in and what his place was in his life, right? And intellectually, he was very deep. He would devour books about philosophy and spirituality. He was extremely well traveled as well. I mean, his parents took him all over the place because they wanted him to be culturally well rounded. But in the quiet moments when the world wasn't moving around him and he had time to just be, he was restless. For instance, he had this habit, and I'm calling it a habit because that's what his family kind of thought it was in the beginning, this habit of rearranging his room. And the funny thing is, I've seen memes from the 90s where they make fun of the fact that girls used to have sleepovers, and then in the middle of the night, they would rearrange their whole room together, and the mom would walk in and be like, "What are you doing?" But Brent would lose whole nights fixing his room, moving posters, organizing and reorganizing everything until something about this space felt right to him. But from the outside, it started to look a lot like OCD.
I used to love reorganizing my apartment.
Really?
All the like every few months, it just felt like a clean, fresh beginning.
I'm so not like that. Like I get like, I'm like, oh no, I like routine. I like to know like this is here. If it's like somewhere else, I will get anxiety. So it's interesting how people can be different.
But back in high school, he confided in his mom that he was feeling really low. But instead of getting him therapy, she let him brush off the idea and move on without it.
Yeah, instead she was like, why not get into debate like I did? Let off some steam, focus on something that, matters, thinking that's going to cure him.
So he did. He pushed forward and excelled. And by senior year, he was the handsome, popular, hypersocial kid who sometimes slipped off into that private, obsessive space to clear his head. But after graduation, that sense of purpose that he'd always had, being a good student, wasn't nearly as clear anymore.
Exactly. That's a big turning point for a lot of kids because they've kind of just had one job, right? Just do good in school. But now you're in the real world. And it's within the confines, in this case, of a private school with the same kind of people in a wealthy area. And it's almost like he was sheltered. He's in his own bubble. And that's not reality.
But in Brent's life, that line between becoming more spiritual and his mind starting to unravel got blurry. He was trying to figure out where to go to college. His sister was headed to Vanderbilt, but he wanted to go somewhere different. And unfortunately, as we talked about it earlier, he didn't measure up. And that was pretty devastating for him.
And his parents were getting kind of desperate to figure out what they could do. They were thinking about making donations to colleges so that they could kind of get him in. And I guess that's one way that wealthy people kind of work the system. And in the end, he decided to opt for Vanderbilt in 1994 because his family already had ties there and they were able to pull some strings. Now, he wasn't proud of it. I think when you're handed opportunities, they don't feel as good. He partied a lot, acid, mushrooms, lots of experimenting, but he called it more finding himself. His major was actually religious studies, and slowly he cared less about getting high and more about a higher purpose. By the way, anytime he came home, he would meet up with his girlfriend because him and Brittany were still together. And at this point, they had become intimate. This was another interesting part of his personality because, not to be weird, but in the bedroom, he was pretty aggressive. He liked control. But Brittany wasn't just someone he wanted to hook up with. He was actually in love with her. She was very special to him. He treated her very well. I mean, he even respected the fact that she didn't want to sleep with him until way later, and he was 20 when that happened. But he had already been active with girls starting when he was 16. We told you about him bringing girls into his bedroom. He would close the door, and his dad wouldn't care. It was kind of like, oh, you got another notch in your belt, buddy. Like his dad was one of those guys that was proud of it.
But now, studying religion at Vanderbilt, he was going on these spiritual retreats where he'd travel to other countries and do charity work, like helping rebuild homes and even roads in small towns. But those journeys weren't just physical. He wasn't only climbing mountains, he was also getting high on ayahuasca. In his quest to find himself and become more and more enlightened, he kept chasing these experiences. And then during the summer, he would go back home to Alabama and work with his father at the Pepsi company. Even though it wasn't ideal for him, he saw it as a fallback plan in case he couldn't figure out what he wanted to do with his future.
Yeah, and I think that's a little bit of a problem because in the beginning, you can get a job with your parents since they own the company, but at some point, you are expected to be a corporate employee. And you have to measure up and do the job really well, just like another employee would do who deserves to be there because they're not handed it. And I think, yeah, it's great to believe you have a fallback plan, but that also means you won't excel on your path because you're always thinking, oh, I can just go do that if I have to.
And his grades were decent, and he stayed in Vanderbilt for 2 years before finally telling his parents that he wasn't happy there. By his second year, he wasn't socializing the way he once had. He started pulling back, becoming more of a recluse, spending hours buried in spiritual manuscripts like the Tao Te Ching. Now, if you don't know, it's an ancient Chinese text about Tao, the underlying principle of the universe. It teaches how to live in harmony, how to live a virtuous life. It's basically a philosophical guide about balance, humility, being in tune with nature, staying present, and letting go of rigid plans.
In his mind, it was the ultimate go with the flow, like follow his heart. And that can sound a little floofy. And he wasn't really guided in a certain direction. He was kind of just waiting for something to come to him. He was also reading the Celestine Prophecy. I hope I'm saying that right. Celestine. Okay, I also read that book, even though I can't pronounce it. Just so you know, I went to college and my major was also biblical studies. And when he came home for Thanksgiving break that year, he would meet up with Brittany and they would talk about stuff, but it was starting to become way over her head. He was saying things like the spirit was guiding him and that him and her were soulmates and that nothing is an accident. And there's people who believe that, whether it's spiritual or religious. And I don't really think there's anything innately wrong with thinking that, unless you're going off the rails completely. And by this time, Brittany was getting a sense that they were in two completely different mindsets. Because remember, she's coming from where he originally did, not the spiritual realm, but the world of the material, fast cars, high-paying jobs, mansions. And he didn't care about that anymore. He wanted to be a minimalist and live in the forest and become like Buddha. But it wasn't just that Brittany thought he was kind of coming undone. When he would write her emails, he admitted, quote, "I'm absolutely losing it," end quote. But this was in reference to the fact that he felt too sheltered where he was at Vanderbilt and he needed to branch out. So he was trying to convince his parents to let him take some time off from college so he could figure out what direction to go in.
He specifically asked to take time off so he can study Eastern philosophy, things like Buddhism, Hinduism, and other traditions from East and South Asia. These belief systems emphasize harmony and balance, like we talked about earlier, rather than the more individualized, focused nature of many Western philosophies. Eastern philosophy centers on karma and how you treat other people in the world.
If it seems like we're going all over the place with this, we're not. It's just important to understand his mindset because his parents were just murdered. The detectives want to know everything they can about Brent, since his sister and also one of Charlotte's friends was saying they thought things that happened to him could have caused him to become unhinged and to do something like this. But it doesn't seem like a person who's studying Buddhism and Dharma and yin and yang would go off and hurt another person, because those beliefs, like you said, and those religions are all about being kind and doing things that don't hurt others, because essentially they will come back to you.
That's exactly right. And they began to interview his sister, other family members, his friends, and even his ex, Brittany. They were trying to piece together a full picture of his childhood since they already knew Robin's story and where she ended up. They wanted to understand this entire family because that context really mattered.
Exactly, especially for victimology. So after his sophomore year, Brent did what he sought out to do. He started going to a Buddhist monastery, and for about a year, he just traveled all over the world, in and out of the country, camping out, going on walkabouts, reading, and just indulging in everything that had to do with Eastern religion. But when he would talk to Brittany, she was probably the first person who didn't think that this so-called spiritual journey was truly about seeking to be enlightened. She thought it was due to mental illness.
He had changed so much. He just wasn't the person that she used to know. He wasn't interested in socializing anymore. He wanted to be alone, and Brittany couldn't see where she would fit into his world. That was pretty much the last time that they ever truly connected.
Yeah, and she was actually really blunt about what was going on. She said the last time she had seen him, they tried to be intimate. He wasn't even turned on, and he had no interest in intimacy. And that wasn't normal for her, especially because he went off the deep end, explaining how sexuality and being turned on is a weakness and it's a sin, and how he has to strengthen his mind against it. Almost like, don't let your man parts do the thinking. And speaking of doing thinking, his mom was starting to think that Brent's lifestyle was concerning because he didn't have a job, he didn't have a direction, and anytime he spent time off, they're wondering, is he ever going to go back to school? Is he going to go back to Vanderbilt? In the meanwhile, they wanted him to come work at Pepsi again, so he did. But as could be expected, he wasn't right for the job. Remember how I mentioned organizing his bedroom? Well, it was more like OCD. And that started happening at work. He was supposed to be doing audits and running numbers, but instead, people found him stacking and lining up labels on Pepsi bottles and being really OCD for hours on end.
And as you'd guess, he got fired.
Not a surprise.
He was really devastated by it, but at the same time, he acted like it was a relief, like he was meant for something bigger anyway, and that job was beneath him. So he decides he wanted to become a monk.
A monk. And if you think this father was disappointed that he didn't get into colleges, that they had to get him into Vanderbilt, that he left after 2 years and he went on spiritual walkabouts for apparently no reason, and he didn't have a job, he was even more disappointed with the fact that his son wanted to be some weird recluse. Brent even told Brittany that it was over between him and her, and it was around the same time. He no longer had any feelings for her, according to him. So it really did seem like he was done with the modern world and the ordinary ideals. He confided everything to his mother, and she decided to let him stay at the Lake Martin house that they owned, where it seemed like he could be free and read his books and focus on where he wanted to go next. But that meant they were also giving him a place to stay rent-free. Charlotte didn't want to feel like she was losing a grip on her own son because they had been so close. So she decided she was also going to move out there with him just for a little while, and she was going to read all the same books that he read, do the same spiritual journey so that she could connect with him on that level. And on one hand, I honestly do think that that's amazing, that this mom wanted to understand her son so much that she went into his world. So much so, for his 21st birthday, she paid a lot of money for him to go on one of these retreats again. And these were not cheap. And his dad was not happy. He didn't think any of this was worth it.
But he'd argue with his dad that it was worth it, and that his dad just wouldn't understand because he wasn't the one chasing enlightenment. So why would his father's opinion even matter? Through all of this, Brent was keeping a diary, so we know what he was thinking from some of those entries. He was fully dedicated to his life with God. He didn't see any of this as wasting time. He was waiting for God to tell him what he was meant to do with his life. And once he heard the calling, he believed he'd simply follow it.
But speaking of wasting time and wasting his life, he was wasting away physically. He was so isolated. He was so into worship and reading and being antisocial that he was also neglecting himself. His weight had dropped significantly, and he was now also only eating vegetables and living off nature. But that didn't stop him from enjoying a little bit of nature's party favors, if you will. He was getting high on marijuana and he was drinking in excess. So I wondered, where does that fit in? His mom knew that mental illness wasn't foreign to their family. Her mom had a history of mental illness and alcoholism, so she was really trying to protect Brent. She really wanted him to go back to college and kind of come back down to earth. So in the fall of 1998, Mr. Springford did what he could and once again got him accepted to Oberlin College, which is where Brent said he wanted to study. He had met some people on one of his retreats that went there, and he thought that he would fit in. His parents were paying for school and a place for him to live, but it didn't last.
After about a week of what he described as trying to get his room set up and only attending classes for 3 days, he decided it wasn't for him. Instead, he wanted to try living as a monk in a Buddhist community in California.
I mean, it kind of makes my head hurt thinking about all the back and forth. And as a parent, I can imagine how frustrating it would be because you're trying so hard to put your son on the right path, and it seems like he just can't do it. So they made a compromise. He said, if you let me go to California and go on this retreat, when it's over, I will go to Naropa University in Boulder, Colorado, which he called a Mecca for Eastern traditions. And that was the deal. And he enrolled for the spring semester in January of 1999 to study Buddhism and ecology.
His early months at Naropa showed both competence and strain. He kept his grades up, but he couldn't stop the rituals, spending 2 weeks fixing his new space, sitting in full lotus during lectures, ordering stacks of books in bursts that looked manic to worried relatives. He'd pick up small tickets for things like speeding and an improper signal, all while describing strange sensory flares, flashes of lights and sounds and bells that came and went.
Yeah, that does not sound normal, but his mom and dad really wanted him to be. They even visited, and so did Brittany, and to some, he did seem on track. But to Charlotte, something felt cultish, as if there was some kind of outside influence on him, not school itself, but something else had gotten to him. And there definitely were outside influences. And one of them was kind of like this philosopher, spiritual teacher, and he got in a lot of trouble with the law later on. But he had this multi-million-dollar retreat company out in Canada. His name is Jon DeRuyter, and he's been charged in 2023 with 4 counts of SA. So not really on the up and up. And yes, very cultish. I think people who are in these vulnerable situations where they believe that they're going to be in the spiritual presence of these like gurus and things like that, they can be taken advantage of because it's so abstract. It's like, do you feel the aura or something? And it's like, yeah, I think I do, but maybe not. And think about how frustrating it would have been for his parents because he just keeps saying the same thing. It's like, okay, I'll go back to college, but I'm going to study, Buddhism. And it's like, no, they probably want him to study like engineering or something.
Absolutely. And the alcoholism and drug dabbling definitely doesn't help.
Ayahuasca was in another case I did. And although some people do say it enlightened them, a lot of people go off the deep end after they do it. And if you continue to rely on it and think that it's actually opening your mind, it can actually be deteriorating your mind. And we don't know how much he was doing, how many times, but it sounds like it was part of his retreating.
Those gurus and self-help people, it's a very interesting world, that group.
I know, and it is cultish in a lot of ways.
Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not. It depends on who you are, right?
And I think a little bit of something can be helpful. Like, okay, I'll read this book by this person. I can take some, leave some, like the meat and bones kind of thing. But I think when you get too far into it, I mean, there have been whole killings, like mass self-inflict with a group of people because you're so into the mindset.
Sure. But at this point, Brent was driving out to San Francisco for this man's retreat, shaving his head and trying to convince his parents to keep funding everything. And they did, at least for a little while, until Charlotte finally put her foot down. She genuinely thought he had some kind of mood disorder, maybe bipolar, because of the way he threw himself into these retreats. It looked manic to her, so she was worried, and that she even met with some of his friends privately, asking for them to keep an eye on him.
Yeah, at that point, you're really worried about your child. If you're telling their friends, your adult child, like, keep an eye on him. And one of those people that Charlotte started confiding in was Carolyn Scout, the woman that Brent ended up marrying. But before they became a couple, Carolyn was another spiritual guru that Brent had heard about, and he wanted to have a session with her. She specialized in spiritual healing. The thing about this world and these abstract beliefs is that you can be whatever you want to be. And Carolyn Scout had been many things, self-proclaimed in many ways. She was very mysterious, but I don't think it was because she was special. It was on purpose because she was manipulative. Her birth name was Carol Gonzalez. She began going by Carolyn, adding the Lynn, and then Scout. Apparently that came from her previous husband, whose last name was Scott. And then after they divorced, she changed it to Scout. Maybe because of the way it sounded. And we'll get a little bit more into this, but she was not a licensed therapist or anything like that, except that's how she would market herself. And she would counsel people on relationships, on family matters, specifically Native American. And that's why I said Scout, because maybe, I don't know, she would wear her hair in braids. She would put feathers in it. She claimed that she was Native American, but she was not.
Like Kimber said, her specialty was spiritual healing, but her focus was breathing sessions.
And she was specifically a Native American spiritual healer, just so you know. And she would say that she drew from the gods and, the chiefs and stuff. All BS. And I wonder how much all this costs.
They're not cheap. $100 an hour.
Wow. And let me guess, you have to do a minimum of like several hours of these breathing sessions.
I'd imagine so. She would definitely need time because that was the whole point of these breathing sessions. It was to actually get people to confide in her about very personal things, business dealings, and confidential information.
That kind of sounds like hypnosis to me.
She seemed to have this strange pull over people because when Brent first met her, he wasn't just impressed by her supposed expertise, he thought she was like a god and actually bowed to her. That was a huge signal to her that he could be easily controlled.
If you actually give yourself a visual of him meeting her for the first time and bowing like to her feet, that's pretty incredible. And you may now see where this is going because investigators did. This woman, this so-called expert guru, didn't seem like she had good intentions.
No, not at all, and it sounds like a scam. She had a bad reputation and was allegedly moving around a lot, changing her name and conning people out of money. She even told Charlotte and plenty of other people that she worked with Native American individuals, like Kimber said, who were going through hard times, and that she'd built some kind of refuge center for them, but that never happened. But Brent was taken by her. He believed she could heal him. She had him reading specific books and paying for these expensive breathing sessions. And other people had already noticed that she used those sessions for her own benefit, usually to convince clients that the people closest to them were bad or toxic.
Yeah, and it was kind of like she would say, I mean, she didn't say this, this is how I imagine it. It's like, I identify as a Native American woman. Do you remember that one woman from maybe a decade ago? I don't remember her name, but she identified as a Black person, but she was really white. Tell me if you remember that lady below. That's a whole documentary that they did on her. It's crazy. But Carolyn had many times turned family members against one another, and this is part of isolation. It happens with a lot of people in domestic incidents and situations where they will try to take their partner away from their family so they don't have a support system, and the partner is the only one that they can rely on and confide in.
She would also make clients believe that they had to keep coming back, that if they stopped, something spiritually bad would happen to them. Some former clients even wound up in legal trouble because they started stealing things to sell just so they could afford her sessions.
Yeah, and this makes me so mad because, like I said, these people are already vulnerable. She knows because she's watching, and when she's like, oh, he's bowing to me, ching, ching, it's like really, really sick. And all of this was being reported to investigators as they were diving into who this woman was. And the crazy part is Brent's parents did not know that he was married to her. And we're going to get to that. Lots of secrets. The way that she was working herself into his life is that she would use these breathing sessions to ask him about the things he was concerned about. And he ended up mentioning his family and their dynamic. And she started to guide him to think that his parents were unloving, that they didn't care about him, that they gave his sister more than they gave him, and that they saw him as an outcast and that they owed him for treating him the way that they did. This made him continue asking for money so he could continue this session. So it was a big circle of manipulation.
Charlotte had believed Carolyn was taking care of Brent, keeping him steady, and she'd even been writing extra checks to Carolyn so she could give Brent a place to stay. But without Charlotte knowing, he was actually living in a rundown mobile home behind Carolyn's nice property, a place that she was paying for with Mr. Springford's money.
Yeah, it was a mobile home, and he would spend hours like redoing it over and over and over and over again. And all the while, she's living in this nice house, but she's probably convincing him, like, for spiritual reasons, like, you should be in this little cave.
And maybe even partly because he wants to be a monk, and monks aren't materialistic.
Exactly. And I don't think at this point he cared. And the marriage wasn't even something that Brent knew he was going to be committing to. It was out of the blue. It was in June of the year 2000. All of a sudden, Carolyn tells him, oh, we're going to South Dakota. He has no idea why. He goes with her. And before he knows it, they're getting married. So he was tricked into it. And within just a year, the Springfords had given this woman almost $100,000, which is just insane. And now I think you know why she wanted to be legally married to Brent, because he was supposed to inherit at least half of his family's fortune eventually. And she probably wanted that to be sooner than later.
And there was another issue between Charlotte and Carolyn. Charlotte wanted her son to get real medical treatment because she truly believed he was dealing with a mental illness, but Carolyn kept pushing for a more natural remedy instead. Charlotte had even written letters warning her that Brent needed professional help, that seeing a psychiatrist wouldn't hurt anything. If he wasn't bipolar, that'd be great. She'd be relieved to be wrong. But if he didn't get the right medication, she feared it could get worse.
And what Charlotte didn't know is that this woman also had a reputation for conning people in the medical sense as well. She was doing business with this doctor who would see patients and then prescribe them things like herbs and natural ways to heal. And he always told them that they had some kind of poisoning in their body, like toxic levels of this or that, like mercury, for example. And then he would charge them thousands of dollars for his help. And this is what Carolyn was doing, having him see this guy with no intention of actually helping Brent get the care he really needed. And over time, Brent came to resent his parents more and more, especially when he had been fired from the Pepsi plant. He had begged his dad to please move him and Caroline and her kids into a house in Alabama. Brent wanted his parents to let him collect a salary from the business and even pay all the expensive tuition for Carolyn's young child to go to the same private school that he attended. But when they refused, he called them evil devils and said that he was going to take his own life, and even went as far as getting a rope, standing on a chair, before people heard him and took him down.
I mean, at this point, it's clear that he's unwell.
It's very clear. And it's clear to detectives that Carolyn was not a good influence.
Brent was obsessively faxing his parents letters over the next few years from the year 2002 up until a few weeks before they were killed, mostly begging them for money, calling them liars, talking about we're too cheap and they were treating him and his wife poorly because they weren't white.
Right, like she wasn't a Caucasian. So he was making just absurd allegations.
Right. And by 2002, Charlotte had no choice but to back off, especially because whenever she was trying to help and send them things like clothing, Brent would attack her saying that he wanted things from name brand clothing lines, especially for his wife. She was actually demanding things from Victoria's Secret.
They didn't know it was his wife at this point. They just thought it was his caretaker, like somebody there for him. And that's why he was saying, well, we should do this. You know, she's doing all this for you. And then you're not giving her Victoria's Secret. Like you're giving her like Walmart. I mean, I don't know what it really was.
And during this time, there was one session with a psychiatrist that Brent agreed to go see because his parents were trying to compromise with him. And he was ultimately diagnosed with bipolar.
However, I just want to tell you this one caveat. His mom had written an entire backstory on Brent and his childhood, including all the mental health history of family members. And she gave that to the psychiatrist before Brent even met with him.
So we left with antipsychotic drugs, including Risperdal. And you know, this has a black box warning and it comes with all kinds of side effects.
The thing was, his parents had purchased him and Carolyn an entire house. They were paying for multiple cars, giving him a salary, even though he did find a job. He was working, which is something that he never told his parents. So he was essentially double dipping. However, it wasn't long before Brent stopped taking any medication at all. And with all this coming to light with the detectives, Brent was no doubt more than a person of interest. It seemed like he had a reason more than anyone else to want his family dead. He felt alienated, especially in 2003 when he found out his sister was engaged. Of course, he wanted to attend the wedding, but he wasn't invited. The reason being that she was afraid he was going to cause a scene. For weeks leading up to their October 2004 event, he was trying to find out where the wedding was going to be. And he was obsessively reaching out to everyone. Finally, Robin had to reason with him. She wrote him a letter and she let him know that she was really sorry that the relationship between him and their parents had deteriorated and that she missed the old times. But she didn't really want to get in the middle of everything. And she didn't think the wedding was the right place to try to reconcile. Basically, she was telling him without bluntly saying it, do not try to come to my wedding. She added that she really hoped that they would be able to have a relationship in the future and that she wanted her brother back again.
So to get a clearer picture of Brent in the most recent past, even though the wedding had only been in October, detectives canvassed the neighborhood around his home in Colorado, and the comments they gathered only reinforced their concerns. Neighbors described him as odd and unpredictable. Several neighbors recalled seeing him outside in the days leading up to Thanksgiving in the middle of the night in temperatures well below freezing. Brent was out there wearing only boots and boxer shorts digging fence posts in the dark. Neighbors also talked openly about his personal life, which they described as unusual and strained. They said his marriage seemed dysfunctional. Brent and Carolyn didn't even share a bedroom, and the tension between them was obvious. The instability in his home life only deepened that sense that something was off. Brent and Carolyn were both described as eccentric and unstable. One neighbor remembered Brent saying that he was just the hired hand.
That's what he said, his words. Even though everyone in this community knew that the home had been purchased outright for him by his parents. All of this led to them wanting to speak with Brent again, and I'm talking about the detectives. But they got word that he had checked himself into that mental health facility. By December 2nd, Brent was speaking with the media. He was calling multiple news stations. He was writing in, he was sending faxes, and he insisted that he loved his mother and father and could only imagine loving them, nothing else, explaining that his difficulty answering these investigators was not evasiveness, but the result of medical issues compounded by shock of such a sudden loss, and that he wasn't even invited to their memorial service, which was even more devastating to him. Going further, Brent claimed that he had not received any direct contact from relatives since the murders and alleged that detectives had warned him that his sister Robin might try to take away his inheritance. He was insinuating that Robin just wanted to selfishly keep everything, and that's why she was making him look like a suspect. He spoke directly to his sister's suspicions. He said, "It was utterly unthinkable that Robin would accuse him of murdering his parents. He portrayed himself as both bewildered and wronged, insisting there was no reason he would ever want to harm them." He said, contrary to what's being said about him, he was far from being cut off. He was still living under the safety net his parents had always extended. From his perspective, this support alone proved he had no motive. Why would he kill the very people ensuring that he had this lifestyle?
Well, with all that, instead of clearing him, those statements only deepened the investigator's suspicion that money might have been at the center of the murders.
I mean, why would you? Because you would get their inheritance and you wouldn't have to worry about them capping it or controlling it, in my perspective.
Right. And as they dug into how Brent could have possibly traveled from Colorado to Montgomery, Alabama, they checked plane tickets, and there was nothing. So they moved on to the bus schedules, and then came a major lead. That's when they pulled CCTV footage from a Montgomery bus station showing a man who looked very much like Brent Springford. And this was on Wednesday, November 24th. And then the biggest lead of all came from his wife. She called the investigators and told them that after they'd left her house from that initial interview, Brent had been hiding outside. And when he finally came back in, he admitted to her that he might have killed his parents. This was right before he left in the middle of the night and checked himself into that mental health facility.
It's kind of convenient that she's the one who rats him out.
Right. And since they were married, there was that legal protection against incriminating your spouse. So the investigators couldn't force either of them to give information about the other's involvement.
That's right. It's like the marital or like spousal privilege. So you have the legal right not to testify against your husband or wife. On Thursday, December 9th, 2004, Winston Brent Springford Jr. was formally arrested at the Colorado mental health facility where he had checked himself in. He was charged with 2 counts of capital murder for the brutal killings of his parents, Brent Sr. and Charlotte. When local police first sat him down in the interrogation room, detectives braced for another round of denials. Up to that point, Brent had shown almost no emotion and had insisted he had nothing to do with what happened to his parents. They expected more of the same, a flat refusal, perhaps coupled with vague claims about mental illness or even memory lapses. But instead, the interview took an astonishing turn. When asked directly whether he had killed his parents, Brent didn't even hesitate. He didn't deflect and didn't deny it. He simply said, yes. And that blunt admission stunned these investigators across the table. In a taped confession lasting more than 2.5 hours, Brent admitted he killed his parents. He explained it by saying, "They were killing their relationship with me." He described himself as the black sheep of the family, cast as a villain, while his sister Robin and her husband were deified. For years, he said his parents had cut off emotional ties with him, and the murders were, in his mind, a twisted final attempt at reconciliation. He said that he thought if he showed up and surprised them, they would be glad to see him. He said he made himself believe that a reconciliation was possible. If it wasn't, then what was there? In his mind, that was what was most important, but that's really questionable. Why break into someone's house to reconcile? It's in air quotes, but like, that doesn't seem right.
Brent claimed that his father had threatened to cut him out of the will, and he was terrified that if that were to happen, Carolyn and her children would be evicted from the home his parents had bought. And he said he told Carolyn about these financial fears, and she encouraged him to make the trip to Montgomery. She even drove him part of the way, fully aware of where he was going. She actually drove him to a bus station in Fort Collins where he bought a ticket under a fake name. He arrived the night before Thanksgiving, sawed the head off of a pickaxe so only the wooden handle remained, and hid it outside his sister's upstairs bedroom, the same window that he later broke into.
Wow. And he said that he spent the night in the pool house in the back of the house, waiting for his parents to arrive at their home from Robin's Thanksgiving get-together. Then, later in the evening, he climbed the second story and went to the window that him and his sister used to sneak out of all the time when they were younger. He knew that the alarm system actually didn't work on the second story. And I guess they didn't think they needed to secure windows up there because maybe they didn't think someone would scale the wall and get up to that level. But he waited in the main bedroom until his parents arrived home. And when they did, he walked downstairs to their kitchen area where he basically surprised his parents literally by saying, "Hey, Mom and Dad, surprise, I'm here." But he told investigators that they were not happy to see him at all. Actually, his dad said, "What the fuck are you doing in my house?" And added, "You're always doing this weird shit. Is this your idea of a joke or something? What did you do? Break into our house?" And this is when Brent explained, in a pitiful way, how his parents didn't even want him there, how they didn't want them in their life anymore. They weren't happy to see him, and he was just playing the victim to detectives.
Brent said this is where he and his father got into a much bigger argument. His parents were downstairs packing the car up for their trip to Florida, and Brent went upstairs to take a breather in his old bedroom. That's where his rage really started to build.
Oh boy.
He saw that his room had basically been turned into a storage space for all of the family's old stuff. And after all the years he'd spent trying to make his room perfect, he just lost it. He said that when he made his way back downstairs and saw his father pacing, he felt like his dad wanted to hit him, and he was scared for the things that his dad was saying. He claimed that his dad came up to him and said, "Who the f do you think you are?" While Brent kept trying to say he was sorry.
But apparently, they were just so full of hate that there was no going back to a normal family, according to him. So he decided, what's the use? Like that was in his mind. Oh, you ruined my room. And I'm thinking, you are an adult. That is not your room anymore. You have a whole ass house in Colorado that your parents paid for. Like, redo your room over there. Like, what does it matter? But in his mind, ooh, that was like he was full of rage. And that's when his dad said that he was a burden, according to Brent, and that he didn't want him there. So Brent knew it was time for him to go. But the problem was he needed a way to get back. He needed money to go back to Colorado. And the only person he could ask was his dad. And you knew that wasn't going to happen because Mr. Springford told him to leave and to leave them the fuck alone and get out. Remember that this is all according to Brent. There's no way for anyone to know exactly what was going on in this house that night. And he gives multiple versions of what happened. In one version, there was no altercation. He said he just killed them. That was one version. This interview went on for hours. And in another version, he was hiding in his mom's bedroom and attacked her first. So there were, like I said, multiple versions. He said after his dad got in his face, he went and retrieved the axe handle. And in yet another version, he said that he attacked his dad first. He went and got the axe when his dad got into his face, and he went after his father. But what does it really matter?
It doesn't matter, but it's still a confession. According to him, he hid in his sister's bedroom until his father came near the door, still yelling, and when his dad walked past, Brent jumped out and started beating him over the head with the axe handle. He was found in Robert's closet. So part of that may line up.
I feel like they're all the story. Like I feel like pieces of every version is the truth.
He then said his mother was in the bedroom and he went in that direction next, sneaking up on her and hitting her from behind over and over again. When investigators asked what was going through his mind in that moment, he told them he believed he was just a source of profit.
What?
That his parents bought him houses and cars and put him in the will and were now planning to take him out to sell everything.
Oh my gosh. So now they're selling it. So he's okay.
In his mind, that meant they were going to make money off of him, which does not make any sense at all.
They're going to make money off of him because they originally gave him everything and paid for it, but now they're taking it back and they're going to sell it. So they're profiting.
Inflation.
Oh my gosh. Unhinged. He didn't just beat them with the axe. If you remember, he actually thought that his dad was going to get up and beat him for what he did to his mother. So that's when he ran downstairs and got a kitchen knife. That was the point where he went and slit both of their throats. First, his father's in the closet, and then he noticed that his mom was crawling towards the phone. So he cut hers too. It's just disgusting and heartless. His own parents, who literally only wanted the best for this monster. But I will say, I don't think it was just Brent. I really, truly think Carolyn played a major role here manipulating him. But interestingly, according to Brent, she had nothing to do with it. And she had no idea he was going there for any other reason but to reconcile. And that all he wanted to do was be able to come home and give her good news. And good news meant that he still had money coming in from his parents. Because truthfully, that's all this guy wanted, a handout. And it is really scary. And detectives believe it was never a confrontation, but an ambush. That his intention from the start was to kill them so that he wouldn't be taken out of the will. With more investigation, they found out it was one of Mr. Springford's intentions. He was planning to remove him in the weeks that were leading up to this. He had mentioned he was taking him out. So that wasn't just something that Brent thought. It was definitely communicated to him in some way. And later, Brent admitted he staged the bodies in a way that he believed would shock his sister, who was the perfect daughter, who in his mind had replaced him. He wanted his poor sister to stumble upon the dead bodies of his parents. How sick is that?
After the murders, he tried to stage the scene to look like a burglary, overturning furniture, going through drawers, but he didn't take anything. And then he fled in his parents' black Jaguar, driving west to Tulsa, Oklahoma. He ditched the car there and caught a bus back to Denver. Surveillance footage later confirmed every step of that route, just like we mentioned before. Once he got back to Colorado, he called his wife to come pick him up, and that was on Saturday, the day he called the detectives from her phone and lied about where he'd been. At the end of his confession, Brent said, "I pray to God I get to spend the rest of my life in a mental institution. I'm not stable." But the prosecutor had other plans. She wasn't open to any arrangement that might put Robin in jeopardy. The careful preparation, dismantling the pickaxe, staging the bodies, and trying to mislead investigators convinced her that this wasn't the work of someone in a moment of crisis, but someone who planned the killings in detail.
Yeah, it was very premeditated. Loved ones of the Springfords were stunned when the truth came out. The idea that Charlotte and Brent Sr.'s son, the child that they had longed for after their other child died, the one they had raised, supported, and stood by through all those years of struggle, had been the one to kill them was almost impossible to comprehend. Friends who had known the Springfords for decades struggled to reconcile the image of that polite, well-educated young man they remembered with the brutal details of these murders. For Robin, the couple's only surviving child now, the revelation was shattering. Not only had she lost both of her parents in one single night, she now had to face the reality that the only brother she had is responsible. After years of delays, motions, and preparation, the case finally reached a turning point. On Tuesday, November 18th of 2008, nearly 4 years after Charlotte and Brent Sr. were killed, Winston Brent Springford Jr. entered a plea of guilty of capital murder. By doing so, he avoided the death penalty, which prosecutors had been prepared to pursue, and guaranteed himself a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Because the charge was capital murder, Brent's guilty plea wasn't enough on its own to finalize his sentence. Under Alabama law, a jury still had to hear the evidence and deliver a verdict. So in December of 2008, prosecutors laid out their case in a brief hearing. They showed that Brent Jr., who was working on an oil drilling company in Colorado at the time, had skipped work the Tuesday and Wednesday before Thanksgiving. Using the alias Terry Chance and paying cash, he bought a Greyhound ticket and started the 1,400-mile trip from Colorado to Montgomery. Records show he left at 3:15 a.m. Tuesday and arrived by 6:29 p.m. Wednesday. That same evening, he walked back to his childhood home at 1944 South Hull Street. Finding it empty, he forced his way inside, later ambushing his parents, and then fled while trying to cover his tracks.
Robin actually took the stand at this brief hearing and told prosecutors her brother's relationship with their parents was not good at all, completely estranged. She said her parents had been afraid of him, though she did not want to go into too much detail. She didn't have to. I mean, this wasn't a full trial. But still, they had continued supporting him financially, paying for the Colorado home where he lived, covering the cost of 2 vehicles, footing his credit card bills, providing him with a monthly allowance of about $900, even paying tuition for the woman he lived with and her children. Robin said in the weeks leading up to the murders, however, her parents had scaled back that support. The state's entire case was presented in just 90 minutes. Only 45 minutes of deliberation, and the jury returned a guilty verdict on December 4th of 2008. Defense attorneys argued that he should be placed in a mental health facility, which is what he wanted, remember? But prosecutors countered with evidence showing the planning we talked about and how he traveled under an alias. He modified that axe and staged the crime scene. Robin lost both parents and now her only brother, and she asked to see him one last time. After his conviction, she met him face to face and she said, "Brent, you orphaned me. Why did you do this?" He had no explanation, only a quiet apology. They hugged, and then he was led away in shackles. Can you even imagine?
No.
What the hell? They wanted a child so bad, and he was their first. Then he ends up killing them. Robin admitted she lived with the constant fear that Brent might one day escape and come kill her. I'd be terrified. I would feel the same way.
I mean, if Robin was there that night, who knows what would have happened.
I know. And to think she was going to go. She's like, I want more time with my parents.
So what about Carolyn?
Oh, there was no charges at all. Not at all. And his jail cell, oh my gosh, it was like a shrine to this woman. Like she was a goddess. He had pictures of her all over the place, and communication stopped just after a few letters between them. And that was it. She cut him off. He would send her hundreds and hundreds of letters that were never responded to. But he would tell his lawyers that he had visions of her all the time and he thought that she was sending him messages. I just want to say, to me, it is clear that he was struggling with mental illness. But I don't think being in a mental health facility is a sentence that's equivalent to the crime he committed. Eventually, Carolyn was evicted from the home that the Springfords had purchased. And did Brent ever care about his parents through all this? No. Did he have remorse? No. He cared more about this pretend shaman guru being forced out of the house with her children. And eventually in 2012, she sought a divorce from him, and it was granted. And that seemed to be the final straw for him. He fell into a deep depression, and he kept writing the warden of the jail, not wanting to be transferred back and forth because he had been transferred many times in this prison. He wanted psychiatric care, but it almost seemed like he was constantly complaining about everything from the food to the sleeping arrangements. And it kind of reminded me of Donna Adelson. It's like, this is not the lap of luxury anymore.
And if you want to see the full story on the Dan Markel case,
I'll link it below.
the fear that Robin was living with that her brother might one day escape prison and come back to hurt her finally ended on Saturday, October 5th of 2013. That day, Brett got attention of a prison guard saying that he wasn't feeling well. He was taken to the medical unit, and when the nurses examined him, they could immediately tell that something was seriously wrong. It was bad enough that they transferred him to an outside hospital. He was in complete liver failure, and over the next few days, this condition kept getting worse. By October 7th, Brent took his last breath. The cause of death was acetaminophen toxicity. He had taken an excessive amount of Tylenol, and it was ruled self-inflicted. Apparently, he'd been saving all of those pills.
I don't know how that's not searched in the jail cell. Like, don't they look for things like that? And even though I don't really have any sympathy for killers, at the same time, he had made comments that he was having thoughts of taking his life, especially since they kept moving him around the prison, and he didn't feel like he was getting the help he needed. And yes, those were complaints, but at the same time, they weren't really taken seriously, and he was a high risk of self-inflicted because he had a family history. But many times prisoners will complain so much that you don't know what's an actual threat, and if they're serious or they're just having nothing better to do with their time. And in the end, the murders of Charlotte and Brent Springford Sr. left a scar on Montgomery forever, one that will never heal. It was not only the brutality of the crime that stunned the city, but the betrayal of a son. And the fact that it happened on a day when we're supposed to be grateful for family and a safe home. And for Charlotte, she was once very grateful to be able to have a child. Her firstborn was taken from her in that fire, only to have her son that she longed for, the reason that her life was taken in the end. And that is tragic.
In a single night, Robin lost both her parents and later the brother who carried out their murders, leaving her to shoulder the weight of the family that no longer existed. Every November, while neighbors gather with their loved ones around the dinner tables to talk about their blessings, the Springford case casts a long shadow. It's a reminder that sometimes the danger doesn't come from the outside, but from within.
The deepest wounds are not always inflicted by strangers. Sometimes they come from the very heart of the family, which are some of the scariest, in my opinion, when parents or children commit crimes like this.
Absolutely.
And before you go, don't forget to check out our sponsor, June's Journey.
You can download it for free by clicking the link below in the description or scanning the QR code on the screen.
And thanks again to June's Journey for sponsoring today's video. We will see you in our next one. Bye.